Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're diving into a bloody topic, the crazy experiments on human blood alternatives. So, Edward and his colleagues decided to inflate the price of human blood and kicked off the vampire experiments. They injected artificial blood into a vampire and things got dramatic. At first, everything seemed normal, no major spikes in temperature. The higher-ups were watching and grinning from ear to ear. If this experiment succeeded, Edward would hit the jackpot and roll in wealth. However, Edward quickly sensed something was off and hastily as his assistant injected human serum into the test subject, who struggled in pain but eventually recovered. But due to the excessive artificial blood, the test subject ended up exploding. What a bummer. Back home, Edward noticed the dwindling number of volunteers in the lab and felt a pang of concern, pondering the next step. In fact, Edward has always wanted to save humanity, which is why he's conducting these experiments. But his little brother Frankie is a vampire hunter who collects humans. Frankie specializes in hunting humans and sells them to Edward's boss for big bucks. And oh look, today is Edward's birthday. To celebrate, Frankie splurged on a bottle of pure blood, only to be flat out rejected by Edward, who insisted he only drinks fine wine. Frankie thought his brother was hypocritical, selling blood but refusing to drink it. Edward didn't bother arguing. He nonchalantly poured the pure blood into the pool, utterly and completely ruining Frankie's mood. Frankie glanced at the bottle, smashed it against the wall decisive. He staggered towards the door, but just as he reached it, encountered a bloodthirsty vampire that nearly made him lose his beer belly. Even as vampires, the power levels differed greatly, with Edward and his brother looking human. Faced with such a beast, Edward felt completely helpless, like he was back in the human era. Seeing the vampire ready to drink blood, Edward quickly grabbed a knife, only to be pushed back by an intimidating roar. Such drama. Swatting his weak brother, Edward couldn't think of a solution, so he protected himself with a chair and yelled for Frankie to wake up. Frankie groggily awoke, grabbed a dagger, and teamed up with Edward to encircle the vampire. The next second, the vampire was sent flying into the corner. The beastly vampire had the IQ of a rock and only relied on brute force. Frankie seized the moment and took a vicious swing at it. With one clean stroke, he ended the battle. When the police arrived, they stumbled upon a ring on the corpse's hand. By tracing the name on the ring, Edward realized it was the local gardener, who was a regular dude just days ago. But due to financial struggles, he started biting himself, leading to his current soy state. This shows that high-class vampires are not exactly living a good life. Time is running out. The next morning, Edward woke up, hearing some noise at the door and feeling uneasy. When he opened the door, it was none other than the woman he rescued from the car accident, Audrey, who realized Edward was a blood expert. She warned Edward that artificial blood can't change the future and left him a mysterious note, inviting him for an adventure tomorrow. After Audrey left, Edward trudged upstairs with a frown, unaware there was a ghost eavesdropping. The next day at noon, Edward cruised down an empty street, not realizing he might get sunburned. So, he covered all the windows, creating an invisible safety shield. Out in the wild, Audrey stood under the sun waiting for Edward, guiding him to a tree where a friend awaited him. Edward cautiously approached, finally spotting a figure in the shade. It was Michael. He used to be a vampire, but after a chance encounter, he returned to humanity, free from the fear of sunlight. Michael no longer needed human blood, and that blew Edward's mind. Just as Edward was about to ask, suddenly, Audrey was held at gunpoint, and it turned out to be Frankie. Humans were currency, one catch, one unit. He tipped off the company, quite the scheming businessman. Spotting an approaching jeep, Audrey shoved Frankie into the sunlight, and Michael knocked him out with one punch. Talk about heroics. But lo and behold, the jeep opened fire, blowing Michael's car to bits. With no other choice, Edward gave up the fight, hurried the two into the car, and prepared to escape. Talk about a plot twist. They hit the road quickly, but the jeep was still hot on their tail. The tension was suffocating. If this continued, Edward could get shot and burn crispy. Michael took the wheel without hesitation, pulling off some stunt driving. Michael was a seasoned driver, using only a peek through the windshield, drifting through the woods and losing the pursuers. They sped along the winding road, driving deep into the heart of the woods, and eventually succeeded in shaking off the relentless hunters. A temporary salvation had been achieved. Michael drove until nightfall and parked by a river, starting to tell his fascinating past. He recounted testing an old car's performance during the day, getting lost in thought, crashing into a post, and flying out in flames. He thought he was a goner, but surprisingly, falling into the water saved him, and now he wasn't afraid of the sun anymore. This meant that, as long as they timed it right, vampires could return to humanity. Finally, the two took Edward to a winery full of unhunted humans, a truly coveted place. Yet, sadly, this was one of the last batches of stock in town, almost becoming Edward's dinner. Meanwhile, inside the company, Max helplessly watched the dwindling inventory of human blood. Things were getting dire.